All right, well, welcome back, folks, for our next honors program colloquium presentation here at A&M Texarkana. My name is Craig Nakashian. I'm the director of the Academic Honors Program, and I'm very happy today to welcome my colleague from biology, Dr. David Allard, who is going to be speaking to us on the 5 techniques of science denial. So we're going to turn it over to him, and hopefully afterwards we'll have some time for questions. So David, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Let's see if I can get this thing to start here. Okay, is that showing?
Yep.
All right. Well, in this time, I think science denial is a very important subject to look at because we have the COVID hoaxers, we have the climate change deniers, anti-vaxxers, you name it. So I became interested in this several years ago, primarily through the climate science deniers. And I found an online course at edX from a fellow by the name of John Cook, who's from Australia. He's now in America at George Washington University. And he has a website called Skeptical Science, which you folks might want to take a look at. And recently he's put out this little kind of cartoonish book called Cranky Uncle. And he shared his slides, so I'm going to use some of his slides for free. I mean, he shared them. You can buy the Cranky Uncle from Amazon and whatnot. I got an ebook, but don't get an ebook. It's really not suitable for ebooks. So I'm using his slides plus some things that I put together. So let's delve into this. If the slide will change, okay. So we have this phenomenon of denialism going around, and you can see it's got a long definition here that came from a blog by a couple of fellows, one a lawyer and the other one was, I don't remember, 2 brothers. So employment of rhetorical tactics to give the appearance of argument or legitimate debate. And that is certainly one thing that the deniers are doing. But there's actually no debate. So they use a series of false arguments with little or no facts, but they cause a lot of problems in our society. Oh, by the way, I was going to upload a PDF of this. So before we get through, remind me to do that. Well, here are the flick is a term that people have come up with to kind of conceptualize the science denial. So you can see it's an acronym for fake experts, logical fallacies, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and then conspiracy theories. And particularly with the advent of the internet, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and any Tom, Dick, and Harry can put up their website and Joe Blow's blog and whatever you want to name it. There's a lot of false information going around. And you need to take a close look at your sources when you look at this information about denialism. So you'll notice some things that have been denied here. So way back when we denied that smoking caused cancer, that DDT was harmful, people still deny the Holocaust. You historians can chip in on that. The Earth was created in 4004 BC as one of the anti-evolution things. We have the anti-vaxxers groups. AIDS, HIV/AIDS was a conspiracy. Acid rain and you name it are all examples of denialism that we've had to endure. So let's look at these different techniques. The first one is the fake experts. So a good start on this is the anti-vaxxer movement. And I have links, and I'll put this in the PDF so you can follow these links. But this kind of started back when an English doctor published a study in the Lancet, I believe it was, or maybe the British, I'm not sure. Nicola could probably help me with that. But he published a study that said the vaccination caused autism. Well, when people went back and looked at the study, it was a totally bogus study. In fact, the journal withdrew it, and I believe Wakefield lost his medical license. And I think he trundled off to Mexico now or someplace like that, and he's still spreading this word. He was actually in cahoots with some industry people. And so ever since that time, we have been fighting this vaccination causes autism. There are many people you know, movie stars and whatnot, who spread this word. I think one of the biggest ones is Jenny McCarthy spreads this, but there's absolutely no evidence that this causes autism or that any other disease, any other vaccination causes autism. And then we have the anti-evolution group. And here's a website of evolution deniers, Answers in Genesis. And they're very well funded. And there's no reasonable scientist who denies the truth that evolution has occurred, is occurring, and that the life we see here on this planet has arisen by evolution, primarily evolution through natural selection. And then we have the corona hoax folks right now, who there's a website you can check with on spreading the corona hoax. So I don't know, when over 250,000 Americans have died, how can you call this a hoax? But nonetheless, people do. We have the anti-maskers, and we have such people as one of the president's advisors saying that masks are not going to do anything or don't do anything, and other people like that, but the evidence is clear. A good example of fake experts is this petition project, and this was a website put up someplace on the web, and people went in and signed it saying they denied that climate change was taking place. And there were thousands of people that signed this, including Donald Duck and Charles Darwin, and a number of other people signed this. And when they went to analyze this, they found that a large percentage of these people, I think your only criterion here was you had to have a degree in science. Well, they had people who were engineers and physicists and all kinds of people signing this thing, in addition to Donald Duck and Charles Darwin. And most of them didn't have a clue as to what climate change is. So the people who actually do the research on climate change are not the people signing this. So again, this is something else you can check out. A book that was put out several years ago called The Merchants of Doubt, and there's a documentary that goes with this. There's also a subset documentary called Climate of Doubt. And this book points out individuals that have been involved with creating doubt about such things as the link between smoking and cancer, the acid rain, DDT, other types of climate change and other types of things. And the authors of this book point out that these people were often in bed with industry, and they really liked a couple of the prominent members of this group were actually physicists. So they really didn't know anything about smoking causing cancer. And essentially it boils down to the fact that they were just doing this for money. They were being paid big bucks. We know that on the tobacco thing, eventually all of the strategies and everything of the tobacco industry were released to the public, and those are available, and you can see how they conspired to convince us that smoking did not cause cancer. So, you know, just because you have a degree in science doesn't mean you know what you're talking about in any particular subject. So I have a degree in science, but, you know, if you want to talk about astrophysics, I have no idea of what you're talking about, or at least a very limited idea. So you need to go with the people who actually do the research in the area of concern. So when we look at the climate consensus here, 97%, and this has been shown in several studies, 97% of the people who actually publish and do research in the area of climate science agree that the climate is changing and humans are the source of it. And then we have a number of fake experts, and their opinion gets their minority opinion gets magnified. A good example of that, if maybe you're reading the newspaper, and the newspaper will act like there's a 50-50 debate going on here. You know, half of the scientists say that it's occurring and half of the scientists say that it's not. Well, that's not true. And if you look at the corona thing, you have a few crackpots and cranks who are saying that it's a hoax, but the majority of people studying the coronavirus and COVID-19 agree that it is causing the disease and it is causing the deaths here, including our very own Ben Newman, who is doing very good work with his Dr. Ben's Facebook page, trying to show us the truth and the research about this topic on corona. We need to remember that science is not a democracy, it's a dictatorship, and the key thing is evidence. The evidence does the dictating. We don't have to rely on opinion, we rely on evidence. And on most of these things, the evidence is it's solid, and it's been proven over and over again by repeated research, by peer-reviewed published research, that global change is occurring, it's human caused, that coronavirus is not a hoax, it's there right in front of us. And we know we've had people on campus that have had it, including some people in this conference right now. We know we have people who have died in our hospitals. And I don't think I know anybody personally, but my wife does. A friend of hers had her husband pass away. So logical fallacies, and here's where we may need Dr. Julian to help us. So logical fallacies, you know, it's kind of when it just don't make sense. It's what we're talking about here. Now I have a link here. Open it up, come on. And this is just from the Purdue Online Writing Lab, but I think probably a lot of our English folks may use this. So fallacies are just errors of reasoning and logic. And we have a number of examples of those, and a lot of these come into play. The slippery slope. So eventually, if something happens, we'll go through a series of steps and start off with something else. Hasty generalizations, all kinds of things here. Circular arguments. We see a lot of this right here in particularly in climate change. We've had some very prominent climate change scientists who've been personally attacked and threatened and had to have security and all kinds of things like that. But the ad hominem attack, so when you can't attack the facts, you attack the person. There's a lot of that. And these can go on and on. Here's a really good one that we use, the red herring, where you avoid the key issues. The straw man, we see a lot of this. You might have seen some of this in the recent debates we had for president, I suspect. Impossible expectations is another thing. Science always has a degree of uncertainty in it. And a lot of folks expect, 100% accuracy. So for example, with the COVID thing, not everyone who's exposed to it catches it. So people will use that for an example. So when you're demanding an unrealistic standard of certainty before you act on the science, and people will say such things as science can't even predict the weather next week. How can they predict the climate in 100 years? So you're demanding evidence that you can't be 100% sure of. There's always a probability, as many of you know, when you do statistics on data for science or social science or whatever, there's always a probability associated with this. And we have to go with the strongest probabilities. Okay, and then we have cherry picking. So you just pick a few examples that aren't representative of the whole. So and we have a good example of this. This is our senator to the north, James Inhofe, who I think just was reelected. And here's a little clip from him.
Of national attention, and in case we have forgotten, because we keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record, I asked the chair, you know what this is? It's a snowball, and that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out, very unseasonal. So here, Mr. President, catch this. Of national attention. And
okay. Whoops, I think I got lost. Oh, here's another one from our.
Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. You know that, right? Coronavirus. They're politicizing it. We did one of the great jobs. You say, how's President Trump doing? They go, oh, not good, not good. They have no clue. They don't have any clue. They can't even count their votes in Iowa. They can't even count. No, they can't. And this is their new hoax. But we did something that's been pretty amazing. We're 15 people in this massive country. And because of the fact that we went early, we could have had a lot more than that. We will do everything in our power to keep the infection and those carrying the infection from entering our country. We have no choice. Whether it's the virus that we're talking about or many other public health threats, the Democrat policy of open borders is a direct threat to the health and well-being of all Americans. Now you see it with the coronavirus. You see it. I also created a White House virus task force. It's a big thing, a virus task force. I requested $2.5 billion to ensure we have the resources we need. And so far, we have lost nobody to coronavirus in the United States. Nobody. And it doesn't mean we won't. And we are totally prepared. It doesn't mean we won't. But think of it. You hear 35 and 40,000 people and we've lost nobody. And you wonder if the press is in hysteria mode. Now that
And here's another denial.
I don't want to give trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't want to lose millions and millions of jobs. I don't want to be put at a disadvantage.
I wish you could go to Greenland, watch these huge chunks of ice just falling into the ocean, raising the sea levels.
And you don't know whether or not that would have happened with or without man. You don't know.
Well, you're scientists at
No,
NOAA
we
and
have
NASA.
scientists that disagree with that.
You know, I was thinking, what if he said, no, I've seen the hurricane situations. I've changed my mind. There really is climate change. And I thought, wow, what an impact. What an impact that would make.
I'm not denying climate change, but it could very well go back. You know, we're talking about
Well,
over
that's
millions of
denying it.
years. They say that we had hurricanes that were far worse than what we just had with Michael.
Who says that? They say. I mean, the
People
on the
people
phone.
say that in
Yeah,
the,
but what about the
night-
scientists who say it's worse than ever?
you'd have to show me the scientists because they have a very big political agenda. That's like,
I can't bring them in.
scientists also have a political agenda. I don't want to give,
Well, anyway, we're in big trouble when our leaders are telling us that things that are true are not true. So there were no, 15 people with COVID, and now we have 250,000 dead. And what is it, 11 million cases or something like that? I think the last time I looked. So when you folks are thinking about these things you hear on the news or on Facebook or Twitter or wherever it might be, you need to think about where this came from. And I believe Dr. Els is on here and he could probably help us with spotting fake news, but you've got to think about the source. In the case of science, our scientists are going to always be asking, is this from peer-reviewed, accepted literature? Has it been demonstrated to be true over and over with repeated studies? So you need to think about the source and you need to think about who it was. You can see if they have decent credentials. So there's this guy, Scott Atlas, that the president appointed to the coronavirus task force. He is not an immunologist. He's a doctor, that's true, but he's not an immunologist. He's not an epidemiologist. And basically he doesn't know what he's talking about, but here we are, he's on the president's task force. Check the date. We have people now who are faking the dates, faking pictures, things like that. You've got to really be vigilant if you're reading these things. Check your biases, see what your own things are your own biases and how they are affecting your viewpoint. Go beyond the headlines. Read the rest of the story, read other material. Are there supporting sources? So in science, we always want supporting literature. Sometimes it's a joke, like what's that thing, The Onion? We'll put out stuff as a joke, and then there's another guy on the internet that puts out a lot of joke. And then ask the experts. So here you might ask your librarian, or if it's about coronavirus, you might ask Dr. Newman about that. I frequently do. So don't depend on any Tom, Dick, and Harry or any website that might be some fringe group telling you what the truth is. Now, when you get into more detail on Dr. Cook's website, you can see that this technique of science denial gets really into a lot of information in very deep detail. Okay, so here are some things you might be interested in to take a look at. And this is where Dr. Cook is now, the skeptical science, the cranky uncle, some other a peer-reviewed article on denialism. So I'll open this up for questions from anyone, and I'll see if I can upload that. How do I do that? So any questions?
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Allard. And Dr. L says, I think Skeptical Science has a nifty smartphone app as well. Very good. So yeah, questions, you can either drop them in the chat and I can read them, dramatically, or we're a small enough, friendly enough group, you can unmute and talk over each other. That's fine.
David,
Yeah, go ahead.
question I have for you. And you did fine on the idea of logical fallacies. I think the only thing I would have said is that logical fallacies exist because they're so dang seductive. They work. But the question I have for you, when did we reach consensus in your mind, right? Consensus 97% on climate change. And do you think, and what do you think of the move from changing it from global warming to climate change? Asking somebody who spends time in it. I remember back in the 80s in high school debate talking about global warming, and it was much more divisive back then. When did we, as a scientist, sort of get to that more consensus moment? And then also, what do you make of the move from global warming to climate change?
Okay, I think the Naomi Oreskes and those others who came up with those studies, I think in the early 2000s, they had those studies, but amongst the climatologist community, it was earlier in that, probably in the late 90s. Maybe the reason they changed it was, number one, when we have climate change, that doesn't mean that everywhere, global warming, whatever, that doesn't mean everywhere in the world is going to get warmer. There are actually some places who will get where it will get cooler. So you have to look at the models to see how those are projected. And people criticize the models, but they've taken data from the past and run those models, and they've shown to be pretty good. And there are a number of models in a number of places, and they all pretty much agree on the trend. Some of the specifics may change, but probably they thought that it started out first as a greenhouse effect, and then it became global warming, and then it became climate change. Well, the greenhouse effect is the cause of that, and we could, of course, do a session on that. But it may have been they thought it sounded better. I do not know exactly why.
Yeah, it's an interesting rhetorical choice to me, that idea that you sort of move off the position of what's actually happening scientifically to the Earth. The globe is warming in order to sort of affect a change. I was listening and doing some thought when I knew this was coming up and you were going to talk about climate, and I started thinking about the idea of the difficulty we had with the ozone. And I was listening to some scientists talk about the idea that the reason they were able to get movement, and I can't remember the fellow's name in New Zealand in particular that led the charge against it, was they got business involved in it. Do you think that in your estimation, is it more important to get people involved in recognizing, and again, it's sad to me that, since the 90s, there's been scientific consensus on climate change / global warming / greenhouse gases, and we've not done anything. But is it more important to get individual citizens involved, or is it more important to get government and business involved?
Government and business.
Well, I think we're going to have the citizens make the push. And that's where it starts. But we won't solve it, so to speak, until we get industry on board. And slowly there are a number of industries that are coming on board. Even a lot of the energy companies, the oil companies are coming on board, except for ExxonMobil. But even BP is looking at alternative strategies to, keep making money and not destroy the climate.
All right. I have one I'm kind of curious about, and it's, maybe it's more of a rhetorical thought, but it seems like there's a fair amount, obviously, of overlap with the notion of consensus, folks rejecting what is essentially a consensus, and the tie-in to this broader affinity people have for conspiracy theories. This notion that clearly all of the global scientists are in on this, and don't misunderstand me, I'm sure scientists can be persuaded by the almighty dollar as much as anyone, but that there's this global conspiracy, or same with vaccines, big pharma is poisoning us to control our minds or something. So this is more of a notion of, what is the appeal specifically of the conspiracy theory kind of model and applying it to science denialism? I mean, is it just a failure of our logical reasoning ability? I mean, what is that connection? Because we love conspiracy theories. Like all humans do. We always want to believe that there's some larger overarching control over how things are going. But anyhow, I don't know.
Well, I think some of it is our fault as educators. We haven't emphasized, maybe not as much as we need to, we need evidence to support conclusions, just that simple. And then, of course, when people are, afraid, and they will often jump at the first thing that they see, and the conspiracy theory is something they can deal with. It's pretty hard to think about the climate, for example, as a system, isn't it? Just to think about how complex that is. Even the little bit I know about it from teaching various classes, it's there is a massive amount of information needed to understand the true nature of climate. So, and then some of it is ignorance and not being educated properly, I think.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I'm thinking, because like it is different when you're dealing with science, right? Because you are, as you pointed out, it's the dictatorship of the fact. But it's to an extent, it's the same in history. I mean, there is this desire, because it is incredibly complicated. You're dealing with every interaction of everything ever. That's a lot. But people want to believe that, at least in my field, that the Templars were running everything, or the Illuminati, or there was whatever. We want to make things that are complicated simple, and it's just interesting to me that like scientific fact doesn't seem to change that. Like we don't care. We're gonna fit things into our worldview regardless of what your paltry facts are telling us. Anyway,
I guess you need is there a psychologist in the room? Psychiatrist? I don't know.
They are notably absent today.
Well, where are they when you need?
I'm a social worker. Does that count?
Okay, Megan, go for it.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this a lot, and this is so fascinating because what is the psychological basis that half the people at Walmart on Richmond Road right now that don't have a mask on? What is that? What is it? And I've decided that it's abject fear, that rather than accept the virus is real and arbitrary and capricious and potentially deadly, it's this exactly what you just went through, this complex belief system, and that is protecting them psychologically from the reality of it. And it's totally fascinating and terrifying at the same time. So that's I think we're living in it truly. I mean, it's like the Canterbury Tales, or I mean, it's like we've gone back to the Middle Ages in some ways.
No offense, Craig.
I knew my time would come. So
I know, yay, Middle Ages. I'm a medieval fan, so that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Dr.
There might be something to it. There's been lots of research suggesting that we are inordinately afraid of plane crashes.
Oh, yeah.
And the same people who are inordinately afraid of plane crashes will also ride motorcycles without helmets or ride without their seatbelts because they have the illusion of control. So there might be something of that just now occurred to me when Megan pointed it out with the masking. Ebola terrified us during the Obama administration because it seemed capricious. But if you're convinced that COVID is some sort of hoax by our political enemies, then you say, well, I know when to wear the mask and when not to. Don't tell me what to do it. I'm in control. Whereas sensible people are saying, well, what all the sensible people say on your Facebook and Twitter feeds that sensible people tune into in their fact-based reality bubble.
That's right. All
I
right.
think there's a lot to the idea of the social, right? And it's an interesting sort of question. The class that I'm teaching, the philosophy of science and ethics course, we started with one of Ben's videos, which says that, ultimately there isn't a scientific answer to COVID at the moment. We're going to need a social answer. And Ben at the time, months and months ago, was hopeful that we'd find a social answer. And we're unwilling to do those things. And it seems a direct connection with something like the idea of climate change. So many of us are unwilling to carpool or have an electric vehicle or whatever it might do. And we're all sitting around sort of waiting for a scientific solution so that there's some form of nanotechnology that goes up and takes carbon out of the air. And there's an over-reliance, I think, on the idea of a vaccine, on science figuring out a way to provide us with something. We're always looking for the technological fix. And so I don't think it's not surprising to me, thinking about behaviors and culture, that we're not interested in wearing masks, or we're not interested in doing the things that we would be required to increase carbon footprints and those types of things. I don't think fear is not part of it. I do think it is. But I think the other part of it is folks just unwilling to change their behaviors based on some form of externality. And then also when that externality happens to be sort of a communitarian value as opposed to an individual value. There's no mistaking the idea that many of the non-masking, non-vaccinating crowds will immediately appeal to individual rights, in my mind.
But we sacrificed individual rights en masse as United Americans after 9/11. A generation later, there are at least two United Stateses, one of them aligned with the scientific worldview, and the other one in kind of a, I don't know what you'd call it, a libertarian fantasy world.
I couldn't go that far, but okay. Other thoughts? Any other questions or responses, David? We've heard a number of us.
Could I ask a question? I don't know. I'm in my car, so I'm not even sure if you can hear me.
Of course you can, Nick.
Don't run off the road.
Thank you. No, I'm just sitting in the parking lot of the middle school waiting for my child. I don't know, I guess maybe I've got a bit of a unique look on this at the moment with everything that's been going on. And I've been administering everything on Ben's Facebook page for the Dr. Ben questions. And it's kind of an interesting, I think, a fundamental misunderstanding of the scientific process by the public really plays into this, because in the beginning, certain things were said by people about the virus, the things that they knew about at the time. And I think what we're seeing is that scientific process being sped up, in a matter of months in the public eye, where, you research something, you look into the data, and then you switch courses if that's not what the real story is. And I think in the beginning, they're kind of these people who are, why aren't the scientists figuring all this out? And then to the point of, well, you haven't figured it all out, so I'm not going to believe you, or whatever you have to say from this point on. It's kind of a no-win situation where, they have the expectation that science is what could save us, but also they don't want to believe when that science goes against what they think is the truth.
Yeah.
So I guess that wasn't really a question. And also, I think for me too, I go back to what David said about science education, and I think that's a big issue. And I'm not trying to put a blanket statement out here at all about living in the Baptist South, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I've had personal experience of my children's teachers, science teachers, saying that they won't teach them certain subjects that are on the TEKS or whatever you call it, because they don't personally believe in it. Now, I think when you plant that seed of, what's the word I'm looking for, of believability of what a science teacher or a scientist would say, I think that grows. And I honestly think that is an issue that we have, especially in this area, about science education in schools.
I used to do a lot of work with science teachers, and probably some of those very same teachers you're referring to at that particular school were in the group. And one year evolution was our theme. And, you know, it's kind of like, don't confuse me with the facts. So I don't know, Nicola. I did my best.
You're back
I know.
to your logical fallacy of cherry picking. I think the world of unlimited information, and also the idea of the difficulty of sort of transcending and moving through scientific knowledge and reading those journals results in a lot of cherry picking. I can go out and cherry pick a whole bunch of things to prove that science is wrong about climate change, or that we shouldn't wear masks, or here's why evolution doesn't necessarily work. I used to teach a class, my 1301 composition course at Morris was built around conspiracy theories and logical fallacies. And I would routinely convince students that we didn't land on the moon, that 9/11 didn't happen, and a whole bunch of other things, because they're really seductive, and you can cherry pick and you can find quote unquote legitimate ideas, but you just sort of move it around. And it's fairly simple to do, and it's convenient, and it's easy, and it feels good. And especially, as Craig was saying, when it fits into your own belief structure from the start, and as Sarah's talking about truth and a continuation and a continuum of it, it's really easy just to sort of turn a blind eye, like, okay, well, I've done enough.
Yeah. Well, the thing in science, though, is for something to be accepted, we need a consensus, or some people refer to it as a consilience of evidence. We need a number of different types coming at it from different angles, pointing to the same result. So, for example, we have that with evolution. We've got fossils. We've got, you know, atomic dating. We've got DNA studies, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all pointing the same direction. The same is true with climate science. There are any number of parameters that you can measure, and they're all pointing the same way. And with COVID, we've had, you know, umpteen studies in an amazingly short period of time, and they all point the same way. So that's how you have to counteract the cherry picking thing. And we're humans, everybody cherry picks, I know.
I was actually going to ask as well, David, at what point do you personally give up trying to prove your point? This is something I kind of struggle with the Facebook group. And I went to a seminar once, and they talking about how when you talk to the media about something, or you talk to other people, and you should concentrate on the movable middle, you know, the people that you can quite possibly convince of your data or whatever it is. And at what point do you say, you know what, I can't convince this person? Do you feel that on a daily basis like I do?
Yeah, there's some people that I know very well that I wouldn't spend much time trying to convince them of the truth. But I haven't given up totally yet, because I'm still doing this job. So.
And giving honors colloquiums about it. So yeah.
So,
maybe you can take over. Can you take over the Facebook group admin for me? I'd like that.
No, you're doing a wonderful job there, and we appreciate Ben and his input. And I know more about viruses now than I ever wanted to know, from Ben and all. He's got me reading all these journals and crap. So
Good plug for scientific research.
yeah,
Well done.
he's dangerous. So
Any final
Nicola.
thoughts before we get
I
out?
would suggest to Nicholas, send them to go research the invincible ignorance fallacy. That is what you're dealing with. It just,
Okay.
when you get into one of those conversations, you get to a point where you just simply realize there's just nothing I can do. Point them to the
Right.
invincible ignorance fallacy. Say, go read this. This is who you are.
Right. And I think when it gets to the point when they start saying certain things about Ben's character and attacking him personally, I'm done at that point. That's the point at which I throw in the towel.
Yeah, they'll move to ad hominem, but yeah.
Well, you might look at John Cook's different websites and information. He has some ideas about counteracting that. The first thing you don't want to do is, of course, challenge them and tell them they're stupid, even if they are. You've got to be patient and as calm as possible. I may have a hard time doing that, but maybe you're a much nicer person than I am. So, Nicola, maybe you can.
I don't know if I go that far.
No, I'm definitely not a nicer person than David, I can tell you.
David, could you please send us your PDF?
I put a link in the chat.
I tried it and it didn't take my email address that I put yours in, and it looked for your password. So it somehow got locked out. Somebody's locked back to you. So if you could send it to us some other way.
Okay, it won't. I tried it on how do I do this? I'll figure out a way.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're pretty much out of time on that. So let's all say thank you to Dr. Allard. Well done. I will applaud from here. Well, there you go.
Thank you.
Very good discussion. Thank you for leading us into this delightful realm of science denialism. Our final honors colloquium is going to be December 3rd with the one and only Dr. Ben Newman, who's going to be talking to us about fighting SARS with lasers. So that'll be our annual holiday virus lecture that the honors program is always happy to bring you. So I will see you all then. So yeah, take care, folks. Thank you.